Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for joining us on today's webinar to the future and beyond, looking ahead to customer engagement in financial services. My name is Naila Pejnigara, and I'm a Director of Marketing Programs here at Doxim and your host for today. I'm joined here today by Sean Kennelly, the VP of Product Management at Doxim, who will walk you through today's presentation. So before I hand it off to Sean, I'd like to remind everyone that all attendees will be in listen-only mode. So if you have any questions, please submit them via the Q&A section on the bottom of your screen. And if time permits, Sean will be happy to answer them. You will also receive an email link of the recording of the webinar in a couple of days. So please feel free to share with your colleagues who couldn't attend. So with all that covered, I'll pass it over to Sean.
Thanks, Nala. Hey, guys. So this is our second installment in the series, and really looking forward to sharing with you guys what we're working on specifically and how that maps back to what people would see as or call the future, which you could quantify as a year, 2, 3, 4, 5 from now, or even a decade from now. So again, wanting to share some general industry stats, which I'm sure some of you have seen before. But really the purpose is to say, here's where the industry is going, and then map that back to, there's technology that gets put together to make sure that financial institutions can actually proceed in that direction, in that trajectory, and meet, what are constantly changing consumer demands. And so I'm going to try something a little new today. This is behind the scenes, a little more of an informal kind of webinar. So I'm going to do some annotating on my screen, so hopefully I don't mess up a whole lot when I'm going through this. So where we're going to start is really at a high level. So this the buzzword digital transformation has been around for a while, probably around a decade in the financial services space, where it's really gained a lot of traction. And what we've seen is really, despite the premise of people digitally transforming the business, or at least externally putting a lot of focus on digitally transforming the business, is that folks are generally still, like if you look at this stat over here on the right hand side, around half of the financial institutions have really only started what they would consider to be their true digital transformation initiatives or journey. So they may have 4 or 5 initiatives. They might be kind of like partially underway, but they haven't really gotten to the finish line on a lot of what they're trying to do. And so that tells us again, it's an interesting data point that there's been a focus for around a decade, but I think it's partially because the line keeps moving on what people are trying to focus on, and not just the line in terms of what the destination looks like, which again will be constantly evolving, but the focus area. So trying to focus on communications and business processes externally, internally, specific pieces of technology. And I would say those are some of the reasons why you see a lot of people really just kind of like inching their way into it, despite it really being something people have been trying to get to for about a decade. Some other interesting stats here, that there's around a third of the initiatives, or I guess less than a third of them, are actually consumer facing. So that kind of maps back to this bottom stat, which is, despite this, the premise or concept of, digitally transforming, primarily for, they've primarily been for internal or, I guess, non-consumer facing purposes historically. And I think if anybody, you've been paying attention to the market, consumer demands not just in financial services, but in general, would understand that it's not necessarily about focusing on internal efficiencies and internal technology, but the things that impact consumer journeys or the member journey. And so that's why you see a lot of people actually investing in new digital online banking technology, self-service origination processes. So again, trying to get to that place where you're actually impacting consumer-facing journeys, so that again, it's not about fixing things internally through digitization, but really about how do we differentiate ourselves externally to the consumers, so that the consumers can actually tell that, yeah, there's a difference. Things have less friction. Things are a lot easier for me in terms of engaging with my financial institution. And if you look at this one, specifically talks to some initiatives. So if we're drilling down into specific kinds of initiatives, these are pretty recent stats. So they're January 2020. I would anticipate that with the latest COVID landscape, some of these items here at the bottom have probably taken some precedence. So I'd assume that these numbers would probably have slid up a little bit in terms of who is tackling what in these areas, because again, the face-to-face typical branch interaction with members has dropped. So, I could just make an assumption that, some of these numbers are probably kind of like in this area in terms of folks that have actually digitally transformed this. But what these data points tell us is that, again, historically, we've been focused a lot on the technology. So the technology around, onboarding, requesting loans, interacting with a financial institution through digital banking, and not quite as focused on the communication side. So consumers can self-service to technology, but then when it comes to actually talking to them or interacting with them at the point with which they are in the journey, that has not necessarily been the focus. And so as part of that, you have a lack of, like, a bit of a disconnect between how connected a consumer feels to the financial institution, because they're not actually, engaging with anybody. They're just clicking through screens and applications. And that's very different when you talk about, consumers, what they expect out of financial institutions isn't just, about low friction, seamless technology, but it's about how do they actually engage with the financial institution when they need to interact with somebody or talk to somebody, or even talk to a computer or talk to a chatbot in some instances. But again, as you can see here, a very small portion of the industry has actually transformed in these areas. So you have about 1/3 of financial institutions that have addressed what they would consider to be their digital account opening needs. About 22% on personal loans that have addressed that in terms of digitizing it, enabling it in a way that consumers can self-serve, low friction, whenever they want, kind of an approach. But again, the numbers are still relatively low in terms of who has progressed across these, across these lines in the sand in terms of digitizing these parts of their business. So the digitization is actually pretty low, even though the initiatives and the buzzwords and all of that has been going on, again, for about a decade or so. And so what we're seeing in terms of trends in the industry, you could roll them up in a bunch of different ways, whether you want to roll them up into technology, consumer experiences, a bunch of different ways that you can roll them up. But the highest level piece, when you talk about the technology, is really about bringing different pieces of technology together. The outputs of that are varying, which we'll cover a little bit, in some future slides. But again, that's really part of the biggest piece, is to remove friction from the consumer journey. You need to be able to bring your technology together in an integrated way. And so, I think everybody understands the loan origination or the account origination process, that having some level of friction for, if they don't pass this KYC answer, it drops into a bucket, and then there might be a little more friction. I think everybody understands that. But the premise of having, that journey be as seamless as it can be across, as the business process crosses technology, is key. So again, how do you bring those pieces together through, APIs and communications and point solutions? Bringing them together is really probably the biggest component technology-wise to enabling those digital communications to be seamless and, at the right time, right place, and the journey itself across all of those systems to be low friction. This isn't my my bullet points by any means. It's from a KPMG report. I'm not gonna read them, but at a high level, the future of banking, again, I think a lot of people have probably heard this over time, is really going to be that the consumer is at the center of everything. So it's not about, staff and branches and business process and tools and technology. It's about the consumer. So what they expect and what they want. And so everything that we do as financial institutions and tech providers in the financial institution space should be wrapped around that lens. And I've heard people call it the third box. So everything you do needs to be focused on. So as Doxim, as a technology provider, we're what you could call the first box. The financial institutions are the second box. So, we help you guys solve your problems, but ultimately we together are trying to solve for the third box, which is our consumer or our members' issues. And so everything we do, again, needs to be focused on specifically the consumer journey, their expectations, how they want to interact, how they want to communicate, lowering the friction in every place that they interact with the financial institution. And so there, again, a bunch of bullet points that kind of support that premise, but that is the high level idea. So again, the things that we build as an organization, we always try and map them back to that premise. So how do we lower friction for the consumer? How do we better communicate with the consumer? And in our world, that maps back to features in software. But that always trying to look at it with that lens will help us get there. And so I have just listed 5 areas, high-level areas that will enhance consumer experience. And the first one is really using data to accomplish tasks. And so, as systems get smarter, as we are better able to bring data together, using that to alleviate certain friction in specific processes is going to be critical. So around KYC, around verification, around understanding who this person is, why they're interacting with us, all of that within a few years will be virtually predictive or prescriptive. So it will be much less reactive. So today somebody's looking at a piece of data or looking at a screen and making a decision. What systems are doing when they're getting smarter and smarter is they are actually making the decisions, and they are starting business processes, and they are kicking business processes forward. So again, the power of using data is going to be fundamentally necessary in accomplishing that. The second one is platformification. I'm not sure if that word was added to any dictionaries. I've heard it kind of thrown around quite a bit. But this is the idea of not just technology coming together, but products and services also coming together. So the idea that, there's what we would call, typical banking services like depositing, lending, investing in some areas. That isn't the lens of what we look at when we talk about platformification. There's, on top of all of those typical services, there are other external services that people try to bring together. And I think if you look at the big tech space, you see people getting into the big 3 or whatever you want to call them, getting into banking, for example, in terms of offering cards, offering credit cards, offering deposit accounts. So they're really getting into that, the concept of platformification. So it's not just about the consumer coming to me, interacting with me specifically and only for what I would call my first tier services, but coming to me for support or consultation or even access to ancillary services. So services that may not even be my own. And so a key piece to that is, APIs, connectivity, system connectivity. But that's the concept. It's not just about technology connecting to one another to create a quote unquote platform, but the products and services that you offer to actually be conceptually platformified or whatever you want to call it as well. The third one, this one, interests me quite a bit. For any of you that know me, I've been in, the origination space for, around a decade, and this one, rings true to me. And I've always, if I've talked to any of you in detail about lending and origination, I've always been a proponent or when I look forward, I've always had in my mind's eye the concept that lending is something where you call it 5 years, 10 years, whatever you want to put on it in terms of a line in the sand, will be something where the process that today that is heavily supported by a person will be virtually completely automated by a system. And so it's less about people looking at data to understand if things are in compliance or if you're in, your TDS and GDS ranges, or, do you have all the right KYC data to meet your FinTrack regulations? It's going to be a lot, substantially less about people doing that and exponentially more about systems actually doing that for you. And I don't just mean a piece of software to, key in a piece of data and click a field and click a button, but I mean that the software will actually do it for you. And so when you talk about autonomous and automated processes, it's really about that. It's about the system doing the process, and then the user or the staff person simply managing the conversation. So staff will get less and less tied to actually following the business process because the systems will do it, and they will get more and more ingrained back into the conversational, relational side of how you differentiate interacting with your consumers. The fourth is communications. So a key piece in terms of interacting with consumers, what consumers are expecting is they want to be able to talk to anybody at any point in time through whatever channel is their preference or most convenient based on what they're trying to do. So again, this is, I would say, a key pillar to the next year, 2, 3 years, even the next few months in terms of how people talk to, interact with, and engage directly in conversations with the institution. So not just people behind keyboards having conversations with customers and members, but systems in certain cases initiating conversations. Systems you could consider chatbots or other programmatic or actual pieces of technology that talk to people, enabling those. So at the start of the webinar, there was the slide of the technology, right? And at the top, it was more, or sorry, the key digitization priorities. And at the top, it was mostly the technology. And at the bottom, it was all about the conversations and how you handle digital conversations with consumers. So again, this thing, the concept of actually being able to talk to consumers across channels seamlessly as they go through a specific journey or a specific process is going to be critical. So again, they might start calling from a call center. That might flip into a text message conversation. It might end up being a scheduled appointment at the branch that then follows up to sort of some secure email, some exchange of documents. And so that's a conversation that happens across channels, but being able to support that in a piece of technology that isn't completely disparate and doesn't cause the same challenges that people have today, which is, I've got information all over the place, and it's difficult for me to understand who's having conversations with who and how they're doing it and where did it end up last time. Bob hung up on Steve, or where did the text message conversation end with Susan about that loan application that we were addressing. So again, the need to bring the technology together, enable as many channels of communication in one spot, and then not just being able to talk to people, but having systems know when to engage with consumers based on where they are in the journey is also going to be critical. So again, proactive communications with consumers, not completely reactive conversations. The last one I touched on a little bit, as I was kind of coming up here, this last one, but really enabling the workforce for this digital first banking era, or whatever you want to call it, which gets back to the idea that the people that are at the financial institutions and the credit unions are going to be less about offering a product and more about service and servicing. And again, not in the typical way that you would see it today. If we go back a couple slides to that, the concept of platformification, it's not just about helping somebody with a deposit account or an investment or a loan. In some cases, it's about supporting them through other buying journeys. If you talk about the process of somebody buying a house, it's not just the credit union and the banking service or the mortgage product that is part of that journey. That journey starts, when somebody's on, realtor.ca or something, and they're looking for a house. The journey starts there. So how do you help them as they're going through that journey, all the way from the start, all the way to the end? And then as that life cycle continues out, how do you have the tools and the systems to enable your workforce to engage with consumers that are really completely intertwined in other technology that isn't your own throughout the the journey? And the mortgage journey is a perfect example because it touches a lot of different technology, a lot of different third parties, various enterprise institutions are involved in that journey. And so how do you enable your staff to engage with the consumers while they're going through that journey? And then how do you, one, make sure that the processes that people are following are consistent, and that it's not about the person actually following the process, it's about the system or the technology accomplishing the process. And again, the person, so the workforce, actually simply taking advantage of the technology that's hopping that workflow or that business process along, making sure that the workforce can engage with that to make sure that those conversations are happening when they should be, that the consumers are feeling engaged, that you're talking to them on the right channels at the right time, and you're providing them those holistic services across all those touch points and the interactions with the clients. And so, hopefully, there's some generic industry stats and stuff that I shared, a little bit of our our own perception in terms of what we've seen in the market and what we've seen folks working on and focused on. But hopefully that resonates to most of you. And we use this conceptually, these focus areas for technology and digitization when we decide what we're going to do and what we're going to build in our product. And so I'm going to go over a little bit of, one, directionally, where are we going with our products, and then two, what we're actually building in our products. So if we want to talk directionally, so we have X number of point solution products. As most of you are aware, we bring those into, or have brought them into, a platform of applications. So applications that work together to accomplish a specific business process or a workflow. We are getting more and more into, one, helping automate the processes within the system. So there's some specific features we're adding to the products to go further along on that path. Two, add some level of predictive or prescriptive capabilities in the product. So making the product smarter in terms of the product or the technology or the data, identifying what needs to be done and when, and then telling the users or telling the workforce or your staff what they should be doing and when and why. So these are all concepts that we're applying across our platform. When you talk about origination, I mentioned this a little bit, but directionally, our pointer is going to, as much as we can, automating the lending process, making it as fast as we can, and and require as little person, hand smashing on a keyboard, mouse clicking work as possible. And so, there's a lot that I think any technology provider has to do to get from here to there. But because a lot of lending is really just about analyzing data, I'm a firm believer that a piece of technology should be able to take you from A to Z in terms of the process, and then the people are really there as consultants, relationship builders, making sure that the consumer is engaged, they're engaged with the process, they're happy with the process. And that, again, I think is fundamentally where, the people and technology are going to mesh. And so at the bottom, you'll see here a couple high level items that we're also focusing across the platform. So not just in, either a point solution, LOS or CRM or AOS or CLOS, for an example. We're actually taking the concept of process automation and communications and applying that across the entire platform. So we're not building, one thing explicitly that we made a decision on was not to build communications tools only in the CRM, for example. So we don't want, staff to have to go into, or even you don't have to buy a CRM to be able to communicate digitally with your members. So in our LOS, we're actually going to have, like if you're an LOS point solution subscriber, you're going to be able to talk to your members or prospective members by email or text message directly in our tool. If you have the CRM, there's obviously a lot of added value because we can tie those conversations directly to sales opportunities, directly to, a business process, those kinds of things. But we wanted to enable the ability for you to communicate across the platform. So, lending use case would be, member submits something online, it comes through the digital channel, maybe it didn't pass some kind of auto approval. As soon as a user in the branch or in the central service picks up that app, they could actually text the member and say, "Hey Bob, just looking at your application now. I'll reach out in a few minutes if I have any extra questions." So the ability to not just take applications from any channel and bring them into the branch or bring them into your centralized services team, but allowing your organization to also be able to do an external or an outbound touch point with the consumers right from within the software. So again, trying to bring the communications together, have the system handle the process, and then enable the staff to be able to use the systems in a way that makes the process for staff easier, less friction, and more of a joined collaborative communication experience as they go from A to Z. So specifics in terms of the actual roadmap. So this is, what we're planning on doing and what we have done. In the April release of our product, we spent a lot of time re-architecting or redesigning the document portion of our platform. So this is origination and CRM. I guess it's agnostic to which module of the platform you're talking about. We've embedded the same document view and all of the same document capabilities into the one screen across the platform. So now if you're a CRM only customer, not only can you compose and generate document contracts, you can actually digitally sign them in the CRM. So you don't need the LOS to digitally sign documents anymore. We've completely re-architected how we design or how we generate documents. You can now edit them inline. How we apply digital signatures to those documents. We now support multiple providers through the platform. We do, DocuSign and OneSpan. Historically, it was just OneSpan. Specifically on the origination side, a bunch of development around enhancing some of the processes, that have been in the tool. Support for sole proprietors in the commercial lending module. A bunch of enhanced renewal support, and then additional insurance integration. So we are just on the very last tail end of finishing the Valeo insurance integration. And we have, again, made a bunch of updates to QMIS. What I'm most excited about is really like August and December, when we get into more of that enabling digital communications and the business process handling. So August and December really go hand in hand in terms of what we're building out. So anytime you see CEM here, this really means, again, that it applies to not just CRM and not just origination. It's a feature that applies to any and or both of kind of those sets of our products. So again, I mentioned enabling, there's going to be an inbox view in the product now where you can receive and send emails, receive and send text messages. For those of you that leverage it, we've been able to send and receive messages into certain online banking systems for a while. So again, trying to bring those communications to one spot to enable your staff to be able to, push out messages, receive messages, reply from within our platform. On the CRM side, we've made some API enhancements. This one I'm pretty interested in here, which is the ability to have runtime workflows in the tool. So this is new. The application historically, staff had to apply a workflow to something. Now the system can automatically assign workflows when people create engagements of specific types. But what I'm actually most excited about on this feature is the runtime workflows. So people will be able to pause and start specific workflows that, assign things out and create activity. That is going to be system agnostic. So as we release future versions of the product, our LOS, for example, will be able to take advantage of those runtime workflows. So you can think of, I've started an AOS app, maybe I've finished it, and I want the workflow system to know that it's done and maybe send a text message to the member saying, hey, welcome to the credit union. Bob's going to reach out, who might be the account manager or whatever, and then follow that workflow across multiple communications that are automated and multiple conversations that might go across different folks at the organization. So again, not just the first use case is CRM specific. So again, it's about automatically assigning workflows to engagements. So again, if you have a collections workflow, you create a collections engagement, it will automatically assign the workflow and it'll start the ticker. For staff, so again, they don't have to pick from a list. And then, we do have other communications specific items that are coming as well in December. Not going to touch on those in detail, but again, those go more to automating communications and automating some of what's coming in and out of the system. And then one of the big things that we've been talking about for a long time is the APIs that are needed in origination to support a centralized origination ecosystem, if that's what you want to call it. So we are actually fully heads down now on developing our latest APIs for origination. It is going to come in a phased approach. We are also working with a partner to develop some origination, self-service origination capabilities against that API, which is pretty exciting. And again, the goal of this is really to enable as quickly as many of the origination use cases to the digital channel, again, as fast as we can. So, starting with deposit accounts and members, quickly moving on to loans, lines of credit, mortgage pre-approvals, then likely onto things like some business lending use cases, mortgage renewals, line of credit increases, really anything that can be done in our system today. So in what is LOS, AOS, CLOS, enabling as many of those to the digital channel as quickly as we can. But again, the APIs are the fundamental piece of technology that we need to enable that. That was pretty much what I wanted to run through, guys. There's I think we touched on this a little bit in the last webinar, but we do have, again, as part of this, vision of progressing with where the market's going, keeping ahead of it as much as we can, developing features and products that help you guys solve those problems. We do also have, the last webinar touched on this, which was our Idea Exchange, which is the portal for any customer to go in and suggest enhancements to our product. Again, as we, travel through this trajectory of, going to where, the digitization journey that we've been talking about, we want direct input from our customers to make sure that we're prioritizing things in the right order. So, I think we all are kind of pointing to the same direction, wanting to do the same things, but making sure that the order with which we do them is the same order that you guys need to do them in is very critical. So I think you can talk to your CSM or anybody about getting set up on this if you haven't already. And then the very last piece, which I'll just say kind of like a thank you to everybody who's on here and stuck around. But the next webinar is on June 10th. It's about member engagement through communications. And so we'll be talking a little bit about some of the stuff that I had mentioned in this webinar around the communications, inbox views, messaging across channels, not just within our CEM product, but within the CCM product as well. So again, we'll be talking about that conceptually. So looking forward to that on June 10th at 2 p.m. EST. Again, thanks guys for sticking around. And I know, apologies, we're a few minutes over, but it looks like the majority of you guys kind of stuck it out. So appreciate it, everyone.
And thanks, Sean. Thanks, everyone who joined us today. If you'd like to learn more about Doxim Solutions, please reach out to your CSM or sales rep, and they'll be happy to help. Have a wonderful afternoon, everybody.